It's time. Time to look beyond the limits of our soft, monkey eyes and into the domain of the infrared. So what is infrared photography? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the act of taking a picture using infrared light instead of visible light. So why would you even want to shoot in infrared in the first place? Well, the main reason is that infrared light reacts differently to different objects in your scene compared to visible light. So things like grass and foliage will end up turning very white and bright because they reflect a lot of infrared light, while the sky, which scatters infrared light, will turn almost completely black, but the clouds will be white. So it tends to give the images a sort of supernatural quality to them. You just get kind of a real interesting look in infrared compared to conventional films. Now, to take infrared photos, we're going to need a few things. First off, you're going to need a camera. Obviously we're going to need a camera, top tips are what? You need a camera to take pictures. And you're also going to need some film which has infrared sensitivity. This is sometimes referred to as a super panchromatic film, and it's essentially a normal film, black and white in this case, that has extended sensitivity in the red so that it goes beyond the red and into infrared sensitivity. And lastly, you're going to need an infrared filter. Now, an infrared filter is used to cut out all of the visible light that we don't want the film to see, and that way the only light that will reach the film is the infrared light. So the film I used in this video is Adox HR50, which is a 50 ISO super panchromatic film, and the infrared filter I'm using is this Hoya R72 filter. So now that I have my film and my filter and camera all ready to go, I can just run outside and start shooting some banging IR shots. Well, not exactly. First, we need to do a little bit of figuring out and run a little test so we know how this filter and the film will react together to produce an infrared image. And to do that, we first need to take a look at the datasheet for HR50. And the section that we're interested in is this section here, the spectral sensitivity diagram. So taking a look at the spectral sensitivity, we can clearly see that the film is sensitive from about 340-ish nanometers all the way down to around 775 nanometers. The bit we're interested in is everything beyond 700, which is this bit here. So in order to capture an infrared photo, we want to only capture wavelengths of light over here and ignore all of this stuff here which is visible to us. Now, to do that, we need an infrared filter. So I'm using this Hoya filter, which is an R72 filter. Now, R72 means that it will cut off any light lower than 720 nanometers. So 720 is about here on the diagram. So that means that when this filter's on the lens, the only thing the film can see is this section in here, which is the infrared light we want to capture. So now that we have all of this information in our filter and our film, can we go out and shoot our infrared pictures now? Well, not yet. The main issue is that we can't see infrared light, and there's no light meters that exist to measure infrared light. But there's also the problem of the film itself. This HR50 film might not be as infrared sensitive as another film like Kodak's high-speed infrared, which was very infrared sensitive. So in order to figure out how much extra stops of light we need to add, we first need to go out and do a little test roll to figure out how this particular filter and this particular film will interact with each other to produce a nice even exposure. So to do that, we need to load up some infrared film and do a test roll. So in order to figure out how the film and filter would interact with each other, I had to shoot a test roll. And the test roll is very simple. All I did was metered my scene as normal, as if I was shooting just a normal black and white picture, which resulted in this frame here. Then I took one at +1 stop, +2 stops, and -1 stops relative to my kind of base exposure here. I did this so I'd have a range of different densities to compare to. Then once I'd done that, I just screwed on the infrared filter and I reset my camera to the base exposure and took an infrared shot. And then I did +1, +2, +3, +4, down until about +13, which was way overkill, as you can tell from the negatives. So what are we actually looking for in this test? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We want to find which infrared exposure has the same density, roughly, as the base exposure. You can probably tell which exposure it is. It's going to be +4, because it has the same density, or very nearly the same density, as the base exposure. If we look at the -1 exposure here and the +3 infrared exposure, you can see they have very similar densities as well. And then the +5 has a very similar density here to the +1. So now that we know that, our game plan is going to be very simple. When we put the infrared filter on the lens, all we need to do is take our base exposure and we'll add a few stops of light. In our particular case, it's going to be +3, 4, and 5 stops. So for every single shot, I'm going to shoot a base shot, +3, +4, and then +5 stops with the infrared filter to give me a range of exposures to work with, which essentially means I'm going to bracket my infrared exposures. Now all we need to do is head out and shoot some good infrared shots. This image is also kind of mildly interesting because the infrared version is almost completely inverted compared to the normal version. The sky goes completely black, the rocks go black, but the foliage actually turns completely white. It's a good example of how different a scene is rendered in infrared. This shot is interesting because in the normal shot, there's actually quite a lot of haze in the background, but in the infrared, all the haze is just gone. The infrared light just completely cuts straight through it. In the normal version of this shot, there is no clouds at all. The sky is just a pure white. And to my eyes, the sky was actually pure blue. But in the infrared shot, a load of clouds have just sort of been magicked into existence. Now the shooting process for infrared is actually quite convoluted, and the simple reason for that is the infrared filter is completely opaque. Well, to our eyes anyway. Because this is blocking visible light and only letting through infrared light, which we can't see, that means we can't compose, focus, or meter our shot through this filter. So that means when you're heading out to shoot your beautiful infrared shots, you have to bring a tripod. And you'll need to set up the camera on the tripod, lock in your focus, lock in your exposure, and get everything set ready to go. Then in order to take the infrared shot, you need to take your infrared filter, screw it onto the front of your lens, and once that's done, you need to adjust the focus of your lens. This is because infrared light does not pass through the glass in the same way visible light does due to its longer wavelength. So what you need to do is adjust the focus to the infrared mark. Now normally this is like a white or red circle on the focus scale of the lens, and you just take where your focus point is, let's say it's 10 meters, and just move that to over the infrared focus mark, and that will correct for the focusing hours with infrared. But what about autofocus? Well, there are select few cameras, particularly some of the later film SLRs, can actually focus through these infrared filters, but that's camera specific. I was using an f3, which is manual focus, so I just manually adjusted the focus point myself. Now you might think that I only shot maybe 1 or 2 rolls of HR50 to get all these infrared shots. That's not the case. I ended up shooting 4 rolls in total, not including the test roll. And that's because I made a muck of the developing. So my first 2 rolls, I decided to do the Scala reversal process, and something went wrong, because when I pulled these out of the tank and I saw the mess that they were, I swear I got so angry I passed out. So for the next 2 rolls, I just dropped the whole Scala process nonsense and developed them in standard HR dev, and they turned out great. So, lesson learned, don't use a Scala process. So before I go, I need to give a special thanks to a friend of mine who let me borrow his infrared filter originally before I managed to get mine. He has a YouTube channel. I've linked it down below. You should definitely go and check his channel out. So to wrap up this whole infrared experiment, I will definitely be shooting infrared again. I think it looks super cool. The sort of ghostly foliage look you get, I don't know, it just looks kind of awesome. And that's the reason why I shoot it again. It looks cool. But when I do shoot it again, I'll probably pick up some of Rolly's infrared film instead. I do believe it comes in 120, and I think some medium format infrared shots would look particularly awesome. But anyway, that's it for this video. See you next time.